The echo of the gavel sealing Cassandra's promotion to CEO of Sterling Holdings still reverberated in Eleanor Vance's ears, a stark counterpoint to the fresh grief for their father. Her sister's smile, painted with practiced empathy, barely concealed the glint of ambition Eleanor had always chosen to overlook. "Your 8 years of contributions are noted," Cassandra had purred, "but I'll need all your project files by week's end." A chill deeper than the Denver air settled in Eleanor's bones, whispering of a storm far greater than any corporate reshuffle. A chill deeper than the Denver air settled in Eleanor's bones, whispering of a storm far greater than any corporate reshuffle. The words, delivered with Cassandra's signature saccharine smile, were a blade sheathing itself, barely disguised. 8 years. 8 years of late nights, salvage deals, and innovative designs, all poured into Sterling Holdings, the company she and her father had meticulously built, and now it was all reduced to mere files to be handed over. The formal announcement came 2 days later, a somber affair orchestrated with an almost theatrical reverence for their recently deceased father. The boardroom, usually a vibrant hub of architectural ambition, felt like a mausoleum. Cassandra, resplendent in a tailored black suit that seemed to absorb all light, stood at the podium. Her voice, a delicate instrument, broke just enough when she spoke of their father's legacy, eliciting sympathetic murmurs from the assembled executives. Eleanor, seated among them, watched with a cold detachment, recognizing the performance. Cassandra's eyes, though wet, held a glint Eleanor knew too well, a predatory sparkle of ambition barely contained by a veneer of grief. When Cassandra declared herself the new CEO, asserting her natural place at the helm, a collective, silent tension gripped the room. Eleanor felt a sickening lurch. The family business, the one founded on integrity and visionary design, had just been hijacked by a ruthless pragmatist. In the ensuing days, Cassandra's true intentions began to unfurl with chilling precision. Eleanor, the company's indispensable VP of operations, found herself systematically sidelined. Her morning briefings were cut short, her innovative proposals met with dismissive waves of Cassandra's perfectly manicured hand, her requests for budget approvals mysteriously delayed. "Eleanor, darling, I know you've been so dedicated," Cassandra would purr, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy during their brief, infrequent encounters, "but new leadership requires a new direction, wouldn't you agree?" It was a rhetorical question, laden with insult, erasing Eleanor's very existence within the framework she had helped solidify. The demand for her project files, initially a subtle threat, now felt like a final, deliberate act of erasure. Each file handed over felt like a piece of herself being excised, her legacy systematically dismantled. Eleanor tried to rationalize, to believe this was merely Cassandra asserting control, a difficult but necessary transition. Yet a deep-seated unease festered. She walked the halls of Sterling Holdings, a ghost in her own kingdom, her contributions fading into the background of Cassandra's triumphant ascension. The air grew heavier with unspoken tension, the silence in her office more profound. Then came David. He caught her late one evening, his usually stoic face etched with an uncharacteristic urgency. David, a senior project manager and her father's most trusted confidant, pulled her into an empty conference room, his eyes scanning the hallway before he spoke. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low and tight, "I overheard a conversation. Cassandra, she's planning to terminate you. Immediately. She's already drafting the paperwork." The words struck Eleanor with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She had braced herself for marginalization, for a demotion, even for a slow, agonizing freeze-out. But outright termination? It was beyond cruel. It was a professional execution. Her mind raced, grappling with the sheer audacity of the betrayal. This wasn't just corporate maneuvering. This was personal. This was Cassandra, her own sister, systematically tearing down everything Eleanor had built, everything their father had entrusted them with. The weight of her father's memory pressed down on her, an unbearable pressure of legacy now threatened by the very person who should have been its co-guardian. Reeling, Eleanor could only stare at David, the reality of her ruthless ousting, professional and personal, solidifying into an agonizing certainty. The storm, she now realized, had already broken. The sterile office air still clung to Eleanor Vance, a phantom chill long after Cassandra's clipped, triumphant voice had delivered the final blow. "We've decided to move in a different direction, Eleanor. Your services are no longer required. No severance, no thanks for 8 years of dedication, just a corporate execution delivered with saccharine venom." The storm hadn't just broken, it had ripped through her, leaving a gaping void. With trembling hands, she packed the few personal items she'd kept at her Sterling Holdings office, the framed photo of her father, a worn architectural sketch from her early days, now feeling like relics from a forgotten life. Denver, once home, now felt like a cage of betrayal. She fled. The 15-hour drive to Seaside Bay, Oregon, was a blur of asphalt and unbidden tears. The hum of the road was the only constant, a monotonous rhythm to the chaotic symphony of her unraveling. Each mile was a physical severing from the corporate battleground, a desperate race toward the one place that promised solace, her beloved beach house. This sanctuary, bought with years of relentless work and hard-earned bonuses, represented not just property, but autonomy, a physical manifestation of her own self-made success. She envisioned the crashing waves washing away the grime of deceit, the salty air clearing the fog of betrayal. Sleep deprivation blurred the lines between reality and a waking nightmare, her mind replaying Cassandra's smirk, Marcus Thorne's oily charm, David's frantic, whispered warning. By the time the Pacific Northwest mist gave way to the rugged coastline, exhaustion had settled deep in her bones, a weariness far beyond physical fatigue. The familiar, narrow road leading to her cottage felt like a lifeline. Finally, sanctuary. But as her headlights cut through the twilight, they caught a sickening detail. Lights glowed warmly from her living room windows. A car, sleek and unfamiliar, sat in her driveway. Dread, cold and sharp, pierced through her exhaustion. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a neighbor. She parked, her heart hammering against her ribs, and approached the front door, which stood slightly ajar. From within, she heard voices, familiar and utterly unwelcome. Cassandra's laughter, light and airy, intertwined with Marcus Thorne's deeper, resonant tones. They were inside. Her house. Pushing the door open, Eleanor stepped into her own living room, now somehow alien, invaded. Cassandra sat on her sofa, feet propped on her coffee table, a glass of wine in her hand, Marcus lounging opposite her. They looked entirely too comfortable. Too at home. "Eleanor!" Cassandra exclaimed, her voice a theatrical blend of surprise and feigned delight, though her eyes held a triumphant glint. "What a surprise! We thought you'd be tied up in Denver for a while." Marcus, ever the brazen opportunist, merely raised an eyebrow. "Look what the cat dragged in. Here to leech off the family again, Eleanor." His words were a venomous hiss, cutting deeper than any corporate dismissal. "We were just discussing the renovations, darling. And the deed transfer, of course. Cassandra's been so generous, letting me oversee the new annex." Eleanor felt a primal roar clawing its way up her throat. Renovations? Deed transfer? Her house. Her home. The audacity, the casual cruelty of their words, the sheer entitlement in their postures, ignited a firestorm of rage within her. This wasn't just corporate sabotage, it was a personal desecration. "Get out," she choked out, her voice raw, trembling with barely contained fury. "Get out of my house, you parasites." Cassandra merely smiled, a cold, calculating expression that wiped away the last vestiges of sisterly affection. "It's not exactly your house anymore, darling. Not for long, anyway. Marcus and I have plans." Desperate, Eleanor stumbled back to her car, her mind racing. The police. They would understand. They would help. She found the local precinct, a small, unassuming building, and poured out her story to a bored-looking officer. She explained the forced entry, the brazen claims of ownership, the invasion of her private property. The officer listened, nodding slowly, then handed her a pamphlet. "Miss Vance," he said, his tone flat, without a restraining order or immediate proof of a crime, "this sounds like a civil matter. Property disputes, especially between family members, are best handled by lawyers. We can't just remove people from a property based on one person's word, especially if they claim a right to be there, however spurious. Get a lawyer, Miss Vance." The words hung in the air, a bureaucratic dismissal of her deepest despair. A civil matter. Her sanctuary, her refuge, her last hold on stability, was being systematically stolen, and the very system meant to protect her was shrugging it off. She walked out of the station, the night air suddenly frigid, her fury now laced with a bitter, profound sense of helplessness. They weren't just taking her job and her home, they were eroding her very sense of justice, leaving her adrift in a sea of sophisticated, unpunishable treachery. The dismissal from the Seaside Bay police officer echoed in Eleanor's mind, a cold pronouncement that her personal hell was nothing more than a bureaucratic inconvenience. A civil matter. The words were a bitter pill, lodging deep in her throat. She stared at the crashing waves, their ceaseless roar a mocking counterpoint to her internal silence. Cassandra and Marcus were likely still inside her home, laughing, planning, living out their brazen fantasy. The thought sparked a new, potent kind of fury, a resolve that hardened her spine. Helplessness was no longer an option. If the law wouldn't help her, she would find her own justice. Her first act was to comb through her online bank statements, a habit ingrained from years of meticulous project management. Scrolling past legitimate mortgage payments and utility bills, a single entry snagged her attention: Cascade Property Services, $150. It wasn't a large sum, but it was unauthorized. Eleanor had never used Cascade. A quick call to their customer service line, her voice tightly controlled, yielded a chilling explanation. "Yes, MS." Vance, the chipper voice on the other end, confirmed, "We received a service request for key duplication and initial property inspection at your Seaside Bay address last Tuesday." The request was authorized by a power of attorney submitted by a Cassandra Vance. Eleanor's grip tightened on her phone. A power of attorney? My sister. Cassandra? I never gave her one. Her breath hitched. The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. Cassandra hadn't just barged in. She'd meticulously planned her invasion, using forged documents to secure access, laying claim to Eleanor's sanctuary with a cold, calculated efficiency that left Eleanor breathless with shock and disgust. This wasn't impulsive. This was a premeditated act of theft, a brazen legal maneuver to seize her home. The police had dismissed her, but Cascade Property Services had just provided concrete proof of forgery and fraudulent representation. It was a tangible starting point, a thread she could pull. Just as the implications of this discovery were settling, her secure burner phone buzzed. David. His voice, usually calm and measured, was strained. "Eleanor, I've found something. Something big. It's worse than we thought." He spoke in hushed, urgent tones, describing weeks of covert digging through Sibling Holdings' financial records. The late nights, the fear of Cassandra's sudden appearance, the constant threat of losing his own career for her. His loyalty, a beacon in the darkness, both warmed and terrified Eleanor. David detailed a consulting contract, buried deep within a stack of routine vendor agreements, between Sibling Holdings and an entity called Phoenix Group Capital. Phoenix Group Capital, he explained, is a shell corporation, partially owned by Marcus Thorne. Your brother-in-law, Eleanor. A wave of nausea washed over her. Marcus, the parasite, the opportunist, was even more deeply entwined in their web of deceit than she had imagined. The contract, David continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, was for $250,000. For strategic market analysis. Pure garbage. No deliverables, no tangible results. Just a straight payment. He paused, letting the magnitude sink in. And it was signed by Cassandra. But she didn't use her own signature. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Our fathers, she rasped, a sickening dread coiling in her gut. A near-perfect forgery, David confirmed. I cross-referenced it with dozens of his old documents. It's meticulous. Embezzlement, Eleanor. $250,000 siphoned off from Sterling Holdings, paid directly to Marcus's company. The corporate betrayal was staggering, but it was David's next revelation that truly shattered Eleanor. The date on the contract, Eleanor. It's not after your father's death. It's 2 weeks before. And there's an amendment, a rider, also signed with the forged signature, outlining leadership transition protocols and executive restructuring. It's a blueprint, Eleanor. A timeline. The phone slipped in Eleanor's suddenly trembling hand. Not a reaction to her father's death, not opportunistic. This was a carefully orchestrated coup, a meticulously planned theft of her professional legacy and personal sanctuary, conceived and set in motion before their father had even drawn his last breath. Cassandra hadn't merely seized power, she had laid siege to Eleanor's entire life with chilling foresight and unadulterated malice. The artificial sweetness, the calculated dismissals, the invasion of her beach house, it was all part of a grander, more insidious scheme. The helplessness Eleanor had felt earlier evaporated, replaced by a cold, burning clarity. She wasn't fighting against an opportunistic sister, she was facing a predator who had hunted her for years, and now she had the evidence to prove it. The 15-hour drive back to Seaside Bay felt different this time. The anger still simmered, a potent undercurrent, but the raw, incapacitating grief had transmuted into something colder, sharper. Eleanor Vance, typically meticulous in her plans, felt a surge of adrenaline that was less panic and more calculated resolve. Each mile marker was a countdown to a reckoning. She wasn't just going back to reclaim her home, she was going to dismantle a carefully constructed web of deceit, thread by painful thread. Pulling up the gravel driveway, the familiar silhouette of her beach house stood against the twilight sky, now tainted by the presence within. Marcus Thorne's ostentatious rental SUV was still parked haphazardly. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor reached into her satchel, her fingers finding the small, cold metal of the digital recorder. She pressed the activation button, a tiny red light blinking almost imperceptibly. Every word, every desperate denial would be captured. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about irrefutable truth. The front door, which she'd been unable to unlock herself, now yielded to her key. Cassandra and Marcus were in the living room, a half-empty bottle of expensive wine on the coffee table between them, the smell of their indulgent evening lingering in the air. Marcus, ever the picture of casual entitlement, was sprawled on her sofa, his feet propped on the ottoman. Cassandra, perched delicately on an armchair, wore a look of smug satisfaction that vanished the moment she saw Eleanor. Her artificial sweetness immediately faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Eleanor? What are you doing back?" Cassandra's voice was laced with a patronizing tone, as if Eleanor were a tiresome child disrupting their adult play. Eleanor didn't flinch. She closed the door quietly, the sound echoing the finality of her presence. "I believe that's my line, Cassandra. What are you doing here? Still enjoying my wine? My house?" Her voice was steady, devoid of the tremor of hurt Cassandra expected. Marcus scoffed, attempting to regain his blustering dominance. "Look, we told you, Eleanor. This is a civil matter. And frankly, this house is as good as ours. Cassandra's got the paperwork." He gestured vaguely, a condescending smirk on his face. Eleanor walked purposefully to the coffee table, ignoring Marcus entirely. She placed a stack of documents carefully beside the wine bottle. Her gaze was locked on Cassandra. "Let's talk about paperwork, shall we?" She picked up the top document, a copy of the forged power of attorney. "This, Cassandra, is a felony. Forging a deceased parent's signature to unlawfully gain access to property and services. You authorized Cascade Property Services to provide you with keys and change the locks based on this." Cassandra's carefully constructed composure began to crack. "That's ridiculous. Daddy gave me authority weeks before he passed. He trusted me." Her voice climbed an octave, a defensive edge sharpening her words. "He died on July 14th, Eleanor cut in, her tone flat. "This document is dated July 10th, but the signature analysis confirms it was penned post-mortem, using a digital composite of his actual signature. The timing of your requests to cascade confirms you tried to beat the probate process. Convenient, isn't it, how quickly you moved to claim what wasn't yours? Marcus sat up straighter, a flicker of genuine concern replacing his arrogance. What are you talking about, Eleanor? A forged POA? Eleanor shifted her gaze to Marcus, a cold glint in her eyes. Oh, that's just the appetizer, Marcus. She slid another document across the table, a copy of the fraudulent consulting contract. This is the main course. A contract between Sterling Holdings and Phoenix Group Capital, dated June 20th, weeks before Dad's death. $250,000 paid out for leadership transition consulting. Funny, because Phoenix Group Capital is a shell company, partially owned by you, Marcus. Cassandra gasped, a fragile hand flying to her mouth. Eleanor, you've gone mad. That's a legitimate contract. Dad approved it. Did he? Eleanor challenged, her voice raising slightly, her anger finally breaking through the ice. Because David, remember David, the meticulous and loyal VP of Finance? He found that contract. And he also found that the signature on it, purportedly Dad's, is another masterful forgery. A precise replica, just like the POA. Embezzlement, Cassandra. That's a federal offense. Not to mention the explicit mention of leadership transition in June, effectively planning his ousting, or worse, after his death, while he was still alive. What exactly were you transitioning him from, Cassandra? His life? His company? The accusation hung heavy in the air. Marcus, pale now, seemed to shrink. His bluster had completely evaporated, replaced by a palpable fear. Embezzlement? Federal charges? Cassie, what the hell is she talking about? Cassandra, cornered, finally dropped the facade. Her eyes narrowed, venom replacing her forced sweetness. You think you can just waltz in here, Eleanor, with your little printouts and your ridiculous accusations? You're a fired employee, a nobody. Nobody will believe you. Oh, they will, Eleanor promised, her voice chillingly calm. Especially when they see the forensic reports on the forged signatures, the financial trail leading directly from Sterling Holdings to Marcus's shell company, and the statements from Cascade Property Services confirming you used a fraudulent document. And they'll certainly believe me when they hear this. Eleanor tapped the small recorder on the table, its blinking red light now undeniably visible. A horrified silence descended. Cassandra's face went white. Marcus looked like he was about to vomit. Eleanor stood, her posture radiating an authority Cassandra had never seen in her. So, here's how this is going to work. You have until noon tomorrow. The terms are non-negotiable. First, you will immediately relinquish any and all claims to this beach house. The deed will remain solely in my name, and you and Marcus will be out of my property by sunset. Second, you will reinstate my position as VP of Operations at Sterling Holdings, effective immediately, with a company-wide email apology, clearly stating your errors. Third, the $250,000 you embezzled will be transferred directly to my personal account, in full, as compensation for my emotional distress, legal costs, and the absolute betrayal you've inflicted. Fail to meet these terms, and by tomorrow afternoon, I will present every single piece of this evidence to the Board of Directors, the Denver Police Department, the FBI for federal fraud charges, and every major media outlet I can find. I will personally ensure that your careers are destroyed, your reputations are in tatters, and your future is spent navigating a legal nightmare that makes this conversation look like a family picnic. The choice is yours. Tick-tock. The heavy silence after Eleanor's ultimatum was a physical thing, pressing down on the beach house, suffocating the last vestiges of Cassandra's false composure. Eleanor left them with her final, chilling words, the threat of destruction hanging in the salty air. She drove to a small cafe in town, the drone of the ocean her only companion, her phone clutched in her hand. Every passing minute felt like an hour. Noon. The deadline. A line drawn in the sand, just like the one that separated her sanctuary from the unforgiving sea. She ordered a coffee, but the bitter brew did little to calm her agitated nerves. She watched the clock, the second hand moving with agonizing slowness, each tick amplifying the tension in her chest. This wasn't about victory. It was about survival, about reclaiming what was stolen, and the bitter taste of that truth was almost as strong as the coffee. Her victory would come at a profound cost, a further erosion of the sisterly bond she had foolishly believed in. Just as the digital clock on her phone flipped to 11:58 a.m., it vibrated violently in her hand. "Cassandra." Eleanor's breath hitched. She answered, her voice clipped, devoid of any warmth. "Well," Cassandra's voice, usually so controlled, was ragged, thin, devoid of its usual artificial sweetness. I accept your terms." There was a pause, a ragged gasp. "All of them." The admission was clearly tearing her apart, not out of remorse, but out of sheer, unadulterated defeat. "Marcus, he's gone. He took his bags and left this morning, before you even delivered your little speech. Said he had to cut his losses." The venom in Cassandra's voice when she spoke of Marcus was palpable, a testament to his immediate abandonment. A flicker of grim satisfaction, quickly extinguished by a deeper weariness, touched Eleanor. "Meet me at the house in an hour." Alone. She hung up before Cassandra could respond, the finality of the click a metaphor for the severing of their relationship. Back at the beach house, the air was cold, almost antiseptic. The renovations Cassandra and Marcus had excitedly discussed now seemed like a distant, cruel joke. Cassandra arrived, her face pale and drawn, her usual impeccably styled hair slightly disheveled. She looked smaller, stripped of her corporate armor. The absence of Marcus was a glaring void, a clear signal of her complete isolation. She settled onto a sofa, not meeting Eleanor's gaze. "The wire transfer for $250,000, Eleanor stated, her voice flat, and the HR email for my reinstatement and public apology, and the signed deed transfer for the house." It was a checklist, not a conversation. Cassandra nodded stiffly, pulling out her phone. The transactions were initiated in grim silence. As she typed, a wave of unexpected vulnerability washed over her. "You know," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "he always loved you more. Father, I mean. Always Eleanor, Eleanor, Eleanor. Your projects, your insights, your integrity. I was just the ambitious one, the practical one. The one who had to fight for every scrap of recognition." Her eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were glazed with unshed tears, a raw, unbidden confession spilling out. "He saw me as a means to an end, a manager, never the visionary. Never his true legacy. You were always his golden child." Eleanor stared, a cold knot forming in her stomach. The depth of this long-held, festering resentment was a revelation, a painful, ugly truth she'd never fully grasped. It didn't excuse Cassandra's actions, but it cast a chilling light on the decades of subtle competition, the undercurrent of disdain she'd always felt but never understood. Yet, the insight, however profound, couldn't erase the calculated betrayal. It couldn't mitigate the theft, the fraud, the gut-wrenching pain of watching her sister systematically dismantle her life. "Your father," Eleanor said, her voice devoid of emotion, "valued diligence and loyalty. You demonstrated neither." The words hung in the air, a final, unvarnished judgment. The remaining paperwork was completed, each signature a nail in the coffin of their familial bond. The $250,000 landed in Eleanor's account, a cold, hard sum that felt less like compensation and more like blood money. The HR email confirmed her reinstatement and outlined a company-wide apology, a humiliating public retraction for Cassandra. The deed for the beach house was legally hers again, secured and undisputed. Eleanor watched Cassandra leave, her sister's shoulders slumped, her once confident stride now a defeated shuffle. The house was empty again, the ocean breeze finally untainted by their conflict. Eleanor still held copies of every damning piece of evidence, the forged POA, the fraudulent contract, the wire transfer records, neatly filed in a waterproof folder. An insurance policy, a silent guarantee that this peace, however fragile, would not be broken again. The victory was hers, hard-won and absolute. But as she stood alone in her reclaimed sanctuary, the silence felt hollow, the triumph tinged with an unexpected, bitter emptiness. The price of justice, it seemed, was sometimes just as steep as the cost of betrayal. Eleanor allowed herself a full week to simply exist within the walls of her beach house. The initial, bitter emptiness that had followed her hollow victory slowly began to recede, replaced by a quiet, simmering resolve. She walked the sandy stretches, letting the vastness of the ocean put her personal battles into perspective, yet never allowing herself to forget the calculated malice that had nearly stripped her of everything. The silence was no longer empty. It was a space for strategic thought, for planning not just recovery, but impregnable defense. She understood now that justice wasn't a single event, but a continuous process of safeguarding her future. Her first call was to David, whose steady presence had been an anchor in the storm. He listened, his voice laced with relief and admiration, before recommending Carolyn Vance, no relation, a corporate lawyer, renowned for her sharp intellect and discreet approach. "She doesn't just win cases, Eleanor," David had explained. "She builds fortresses." Meeting Carolyn in her understated, elegant Portland office felt like stepping into a different kind of battlefield, one fought with clauses and precedents rather than raw emotion. Eleanor laid out the entire sordid saga, from the forged power of attorney to the embezzled funds and Cassandra's grudging capitulation. Carolyn absorbed it all, her gaze piercing, her questions precise. "Your sister is a predator," Carolyn stated, "and predators, if merely wounded, will often return. We need to clip her wings permanently, within the legal confines of the corporation." The solution they devised was brilliant in its subtlety: a comprehensive revision of Sibling Holdings' operating agreement. Carolyn meticulously drafted clauses that limited the CEO's unilateral authority, requiring board approval for significant financial transactions, major departmental restructuring, and, critically, for the termination of senior executive positions without just cause. The document was then framed not as a response to Cassandra's treachery, but as an initiative for enhanced corporate governance and long-term stability in the wake of their father's passing. David, leveraging his position and his own quiet influence, helped present it to the board. The narrative spun was of proactive foresight, ensuring the company's resilience against any future potential mismanagement. The board, still reeling from the unspoken implications of Cassandra's erratic behavior and the recent, hushed settlement, embraced the proposal with surprising alacrity. It offered a clean, corporate-approved method to rein in a CEO who was, by all accounts, perceived as having overstepped her bounds. The unanimous approval of the revised operating agreement was a silent, bloodless coup. Eleanor's position as VP of Operations was not merely reinstated, it was now enshrined, protected by layers of corporate bureaucracy that even Cassandra would struggle to penetrate. The new terms ensured that Eleanor could not be arbitrarily fired, nor could her division be dismantled without a robust, board-sanctioned justification. As Eleanor began to cautiously re-engage with her role at Sibling Holdings, a piece of news drifted down through the grapevine, a quiet but potent echo of past wrongs. Marcus Thorne, Cassandra's opportunistic husband, had been quietly arrested in a different state. The charges were comprehensive: a multi-year fraud scheme involving his development company, funneling millions through shell corporations and bogus real estate deals. The news offered a grim satisfaction. It confirmed Eleanor's initial assessment of Marcus as a charlatan and a parasite, but more importantly, it vindicated Cassandra's swift, if self-serving, decision to cut ties with him. His removal from the board, and from Cassandra's immediate orbit, further solidified Eleanor's position, eliminating a key external threat that could have destabilized her carefully rebuilt peace. The future of Sibling Holdings and Eleanor's place within it felt, for the first time, truly secure. Eleanor, now firmly re-entrenched within Sibling Holdings, refused to let the scars of betrayal fester into bitterness. Instead, she channeled her formidable energy into breathing life into her father's nascent vision, the sustainable building division. What had once been a peripheral, often underfunded department blossomed under her relentless drive and strategic foresight. She meticulously cultivated relationships with eco-conscious clients, championed innovative green technologies, and assembled a team as passionate as she was about responsible architecture. Projects that were once considered niche now became flagship initiatives, generating significant revenue and, more importantly, redefining Sterling Holdings' legacy beyond its corporate towers and into a future built on environmental stewardship. It was her quiet, profound act of reclaiming her father's idealism from the mire of corporate greed, ensuring his values would endure. Her beloved beach house in Seaside Bay, once a symbol of invasion and violated trust, gradually shed its painful associations, re-emerging as her true sanctuary. The rhythmic crash of the Pacific waves against the shore became a constant, soothing balm, a counterpoint to the relentless hum of business and the lingering echoes of familial strife. Here, amidst the salty air and the vast, unyielding horizon, the persistent complexities of her life with Cassandra seemed to shrink, if only momentarily. The profound betrayal, a deep fissure in the foundation of her family, was never forgotten, nor was it fully forgiven. It existed as a permanent, chilling reminder, but Eleanor had learned to navigate its presence with a cold, professional distance. Their interactions at Sterling Holdings were now transactional, devoid of warmth or personal vulnerability. Her anger, once a consuming fire, had cooled into a sharp, strategic tool, fueling her productive work and her unwavering commitment to self-preservation. She often sat by the window overlooking the tempestuous ocean, reflecting on the painful lessons etched into her very being. Power, she understood with chilling clarity, when divorced from ethics, inevitably self-destructed, leaving a trail of wreckage and broken lives. True strength, she now knew, lay not in avoiding conflict, but in confronting it with resilience, independence, and an unshakable moral compass. The ordeal had transformed her from a diligent, often naive victim of circumstance into a formidable survivor. The experience had forged her, hardening her resolve and sharpening her strategic mind, making her a more discerning, independent leader. She stood ready, not just to protect her father's revitalized legacy, but to fiercely guard her own integrity against any future challenges, a beacon of strength against the ever-present currents of human ambition and deceit.